Hey everybody, KC here. So today we have an extended conversation with Phil Lempert. Now you probably know Phil. Phil's been on the Today Show, he's been on The View, he's been on Oprah. He has been doing the Lempert Report for 40 years. He's been doing Supermarket Guru for 30 years. He's one of the most respected voices out there when it comes to food and retailing and nutrition. He's had a fascinating career. He and I have actually covered a lot of the same territory over the years, although I've never been on the Today Show, Oprah, or The View. Didn't even invite me. But he's a really interesting guy. We've known each other for years, and I thought it'd be a wonderful time to kind of sit down and have a conversation about some of the changes that we've seen over our careers and where things might going and what priorities retailers should have going forward. So anyway, that's the conversation for today. I hope you enjoy it. Here you have Phil Lempert. Phil Lempert, welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure, and I love reading you almost every morning now.
Yes. Yeah, the nice thing is it's almost every morning.
Almost.
I get to sleep a little bit more. So you and I started kind of corresponding about this when I wrote about having written about the industry for 40 years. And the Lempert Report is 40 years old. Supermarket Guru is what, 30 years old?
Yep.
I just wanted to talk about that because we both have some shared experiences, but also different kinds of experiences. And I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit because I think history is important. Well, first of all, take us back. How did you get you were in the industry before you started writing about the industry, right? I mean, you worked in a family company, I think it was.
Yeah. So my grandfather was a dairy farmer back in Belleville, New Jersey. My father is a food manufacturer and a food broker. When I graduated, went to work for my dad. And basically was selling to supermarkets. I have very vivid memories of driving from New Jersey out to Long Island, sitting in Dave Karen of Wallbaum's, waiting room for like 3 hours to be able to get 2 minutes with them and try to sell them stuff. So that was the start of everything. Then basically went back and got my master's in package design because all the food products packaging was pretty ugly those days. And the reason was that the packaging companies would design the packages for you for nothing if you bought the packaging from them. Yeah. So if you were selling peas, everybody had the same picture of peas on their cans because it was free. Nobody in the food business was going to pay, to have somebody take pictures of peas. And then from that, it evolved into a full service ad agency. And we did work for ShopRite and Grand Union, a lot of different food brands like Filippo Berio olive oil, Dutch Mill Donuts, Johanna Farms, La Yogurt, and things like that. And then took the editorial side of it. And it was actually, I was on the board of the 4A's, American Association of Advertising Agencies, started writing the Lempert Report and brought it to impress all these hotshots. And Ken Roman, who was then either CEO or chairman of Ogilvy, picked it up, loved it, and he said, what are you doing with this? And I said, I just send it to our clients to keep them informed. He said, take it from me, put a price on it. And those days it was $295 for a year, which was a lot.
It's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, Kiplinger was $19.95. Their letter did that, and then Phil Dougherty from the New York Times ad columnist wrote it because Marion Burroughs, who was the food reporter at the New York Times, handed him a copy. He called me up, went into New York. In fact, I still have the article hanging in my office. That then from there had practically overnight, maybe 350, 400, checks come in the mail to subscribe to it. And that was the kickoff for the Lempert Report.
Why did you think at that point that an editorial approach as opposed would have value? I mean, was it just, did you think of it initially just as a sales piece sort of for your design business? Or did you sort of see that taking a different path would have real value for you?
I think it was a combination of both. It was designed to bring attention to the agency, and put our mark on the world. Matter of fact, and I think that unlike today, very few people were talking about the business of food. So, for example, I pulled some of the early issues out, and the number one story that we had was about yuppies, young urban failures. So everybody was talking about yuppies, and we did some research and we found that baby boomers, the majority of the group, 33 plus million, earned below $10,000 a year. And I knew David Poltrack at the time from CBS. And, his quote, despite the mystique created by the media, this group spends a disproportionate amount of income on housing and rent and has relatively little discretionary income. And, he didn't care about yuppies, matter of fact.
What year was that? What year was that?
This June 5th, 1985.
Wow.
And, we also talked about merchandising by accident, that what was happening is there were a whole bunch of MBAs getting into the grocery business, and they really didn't understand merchandising like Dave Karen or some of the, old timers. And, they just didn't get it. So we had a whole bunch of really bad advertising there. We also talked about zapping on TV commercials, getting rid of, but at the same time, a gremlin called zapping is threatening to send commercials into Never Never Land, never to be seen, never to be heard, never to sell, and talked about, how you have to really focus on that.
You
And
got
then
that
painless,
right. You were ahead of your time on that one.
yeah. And then painless good nutrition, where we talked about the percentage of Americans who are very concerned about the nutritional value of foods that they purchase, and sugar and salt being bad. And the only way you're going to be successful is to make it taste good and be healthy at the same time. You have to make it look good and upmarket it, and your chances even better. And then I was a regular guest on Owen Spann's radio show. Owen had a national radio show, and one day, I think it was a 2-hour show. We opened up the phones for call-in. People complain about supermarkets, and you'll love this one. This was August 14th, 1985. What their gripes were: self scanners. Number one, self scanners. Consumers were very
They were,
confused by them
they
and
were, I'm
very
sorry,
angry.
they were complaining about self-scanning in
Yep.
1985?
Yep.
Was doing self-scanning in 1985. I mean,
Uh,
scanning was barely I mean, not barely a thing, but scanning was
yeah,
not as ubiquitous in 1985 as it is today.
correct. It was far between. Basically, what they said is shoppers were very confused by them and very angry at their failure to work properly, creating checkout display.
Huh.
So it was probably a combination not of self scanners, but scanning in
Okay.
general.
Okay.
And then number two was supermarket clutter. Displays and over merchandising make it difficult for shoppers to get around in the store. Inconsistent quality and services, product freshness. I mean, a lot of the same stuff 40 years ago that we talk about now.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
and
the more things change, right? The more they stay
yeah.
absolutely the same.
And the one that you're going to love is Kellogg's introduced a new cereal, Kellogg's OJ, where it was the first cereal that had 10% fruit juice in it.
I thought you
And
were telling me
obviously,
O.J. Simpson was on the front.
was he? I don't know.
No,
That I don't
I
remember.
thought that's what you were going to tell me.
No, 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 no.
That
And
wouldn't age,
also,
that would not age
we
well.
also we also said that New Coke's days are numbered, because New Coke, when it first came out, had the word new in front of the word Coke. And by law, you can only use the word new for 60 days. So we were saying, New Coke has got to be a failure because the word new is going to disappear. And sure enough, it failed.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about some of those issues, especially the focus on quality, on nutrition, on that is something that I know in your career I think you've paid more and more attention to. I mean, that's been an evolving interest of yours, and that your interest in it has kind of tracked with the way people pay more attention to it. I mean, you do a lot of work with nutritionists and dietitians, and you've been really focused on that. And yet, it's interesting. The Atlantic just had a piece the other day in which they were talking about, how do you get people to change their eating habits, which is what some new government people want to do. And part of them is it's too expensive and it's not accessible to them.
Right.
That continues to be a major problem.
It is. And, with the new administration, if RFK Jr. gets in there, these people just don't understand the consumer and the consumer habits and how people shop and where they shop, to your point, and the accessibility of it. So it's fine to say, okay, we're going to make all these changes and make America healthy again. It's a long road to do that. I mean, 40 years ago, we were talking about how Americans were starting to become obese and, eating the wrong things and so on. And companies were putting healthier ingredients in, but nobody was buying it. And if you look today, with the GLP-1s, we're starting to see, some behavior change. We're starting to see, food companies, ConAgra and Nestle coming out with foods that are designed for those people who are on Wegovy or Ozempic, but, it's going to be a long, long road ahead.
Yeah, I mean, people still do like their Oreos, and at the end of the day,
Yes.
right? I mean, and I'm not picking on Oreos. I love a good Oreo, but that is a hard impulse to break. And just telling people Oreos aren't good for you, well, that's not even close to being good enough.
I agree. And also replacing the Oreo with a healthier Oreo is not necessarily the way to do it either. That doesn't change behavior. What you're doing, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Seinfeld's wife who wrote a cookbook on how to hide vegetables in kids' foods and came under a lot of criticism because that doesn't change behavior. Yes, you're getting kids to eat more vegetables, but what you want them to do is eat vegetables because they like vegetables. And there was a study done, I think it was up in Boston. It was either BU or Massachusetts General Hospital that tested people in eating vegetables, and they found they wanted to improve nutrition, that it took 12 times for people to eat vegetables to start to like them. And what the survey found is most people didn't get to the 12 times because they were throwing them out, and it was just too expensive to be cooking vegetables for your family and then throwing them out because nobody would eat them till you got to 12 times.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is stuff that you were talking about 30, 40 years ago. It's not going to be a switch that they're going to be able to just, turn on or off and change people's behavior. In terms of other changes that you've seen over the last 30 or 40 years, I mean, obviously there's a big one's technology, but when you think about that, what are the changes that you think have been most momentous in terms of how retailers retail and how shoppers shop?
So, one big change is 40 years ago, you and I were one of the few people who were doing this. Now we've got thousands of people who are doing it. So I think one big change is the proliferation of information about food, and certainly having, technology deliver websites with tons, millions of recipes, nutritional information, having all that information out there available to consumers. The big change from a retailer standpoint, I think, has been the shift where retailers are now in control of consumers. Where it used to be CPG was in control of consumers, and the retailers were just, given money, slotting allowances to put it up there, and they were basically just real estate agents. Not anymore. Now we've got, I think, smarter retailers than ever before. They're collecting data on consumers. They've got, departments that are full of consumer analysts now and category managers and so on. And, it wasn't that way 30 or 40 years ago. And the big difference is that retailers, in my opinion, have taken on the responsibility of curating for their customers. That it's not just, a big company coming in, handing them 10 grand for slotting allowance and then putting it on the shelf. Now you've got buyers and merchandisers who know a lot more about food than they did then. Again, I hate to bring up Dave Karen again, but the success of Wallbaum's was Dave Karen's palate. He knew that Long Island customer really, really well. And, he would taste the product and he would say, no, this product isn't going to sell, or this product is going to sell. And we had people like that who were really in tune with customers, which is why, frankly, Wallbaum's was so successful. Or, if you look at the early days of Pathmark, Pathmark was a very successful chain when the founders of Pathmark were still running Pathmark. When it moved to the next generation of leadership, because either they all moved to Florida or they died, the chain fell apart. You didn't have that sense of merchandising anymore.
Wasn't it also the case with Pathmark though that they went through? Didn't they go through an LBO?
Yes,
I mean, I
that
always
was
think
the second
it's frustrating.
generation.
Right. They went through an LBO. They had so much debt to service the debt. They had to raise their prices. And the one
Yep.
thing that Pathmark was known for was low prices. So the minute they did that, they lost their value proposition
Yep.
and basically never really recovered.
Yeah. No, they didn't recover, and they just never had the management. You look at people like Herb Brody, who were, again, great merchandisers, great business people. Again, let's not forget that and I say this reluctantly because I know I'm going to get pushback on it, not from you, but from the people I'm going to mention. But it was really the most successful, smartest guys at ShopRite who left to form Pathmark. And we look now at ShopRite and the behemoth that's becoming so successful and just terrific, everything that they're doing. But 40, 50 years ago wasn't that way.
Well, and the interesting thing about ShopRite is that they have, through their incredibly unique structure, they sort of marry the advantages of being really, really big with the advantages of having independent, committed ownership, right?
Yep.
They have figured out in a lot of ways how to have the best of both worlds in a way that companies like, I'll get pushback on this, Albertsons has not, right? Albertsons has, right? They've got all the both the advantages and the disadvantages of being big, but none of the advantages of having sort of independent, innovative management at the store level. And I think that's a real problem.
Absolutely. And if you look at Kroger, for example, with the KMA system where they have local presidents, it's somewhere in between that, which is one of the reasons that I think Kroger has done well, because they do have a local sense of it. I talk about Morty Wolfson all the time, who owned the Lincoln Park ShopRite, and now his son Larry, and his son is now running it. But Morty and his brother had a small ShopRite. They then built what was the largest ShopRite ever, 80,000 square foot in Lincoln Park. And Morty's job, and he told me this any number of times, is he stood by the door. And as people came in, customers came in, he would talk to them, he would greet them, he would laugh with them, and he was a great guy. He wanted to make sure that he was servicing his shoppers properly, and he was the guy who would walk around the store, and if there was a piece of paper on the floor or an apple rolled off, he would pick it up. He wasn't getting on a walkie-talkie to have somebody else come and do it.
Do you, you talk a little bit about how retailers have gotten smarter and have moved away from the pure send me a check for slotting allowances or whatever. I confess I'm maybe a little bit less rosy than you are on that one. And part of the reason of that is I really worry about the proliferation of retail media networks, not that it's not a good idea at base, but I worry that these things are just going to become ad vehicles that retailers are going to sell all these ads, but are not necessarily serving the customer effectively, that it becomes just a way of bring more money to the bottom line.
I totally agree with you. And in fact, I was talking to Deborah Patton, my editor at the Robin Report this morning about this. And it's a story that I'm going to be writing up tomorrow, the next day, where, retail media, I think, is a boondoggle. It is another way to get, slotting allowances. You look at some retailers who are putting in 50, 60, 70 screens in their stores. It becomes white noise. And, what prompted the conversation is the Cooler X, those cooler doors that, they're now in a lawsuit with Walgreens.
At that story on Morning Newsbeat. I mean, it's a Bloomberg
Yep.
story. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's a complete, I was going to use a word I probably shouldn't use, a cluster muck.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's awful.
From day one, and I met the guys who developed it and stuff like that. And from day one, I said it's never going to work. And they said, "Well, we can track all these consumer." The bottom line is people don't want to see an ad when they're reaching in for ice cream. And especially if the ad is for the brand of ice cream they don't like or a whipped topping that they might not want. And the way it was designed is you didn't see what was behind the glass. You would see their ad. And I remember the first time I saw it was probably in Panasonic's lab in New Jersey. So this goes back probably about maybe 15, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And it just seemed to me to be the stupidest thing. And they had said, no, we're going to be able to track consumer behavior and where their eyes are going and all this other stuff. And, I think the same problem with retail media. And let's not forget that retail media is not new, even though all these retailers are now doing. Walmart had Walmart TV, what was it, 20, 25 years ago? And it failed. And it wasn't 50 screens in a Walmart. It was, I think, 2 or 3, big screens and so on. And people, when they go shopping, they don't want to see the ads. They don't even want to see the information that some of the retailers are putting up there about, this farmer or this or whatever else. They want to shop. They want to have an enjoyable shop. And, one of the reasons, and you write about this, all the time, that Wegmans, does so well is it's a fabulous shopping experience. And I don't think that Danny and Colleen are going to put 50 or 60, flat screen TVs in a Wegmans.
Yeah. Hard to imagine. One last thing I want to talk about in terms of your career, and it's not specifically Lempert Report or Supermarket Guru related, but it's something that you were involved with that I think, again, totally prescient. You had some involvement with AgeWave at one point earlier in your career. And man, I just, more I think about that, and I can remember seeing, I think I saw you, I saw Ken Dykewall, all those people talking about, hey, listen, just because you turn 50 doesn't mean you're going to suddenly wear polyester pants, right? Kind of thing that your father wears. And I think that is, I mean, again, incredibly prescient in terms of understanding how, as customers evolve, they're not necessarily evolving in the same ways that their parents did or their grandparents did. And I think it speaks to what you write about all the time in terms of tracking what people want and what they need.
So when Ken was writing AgeWave, he interviewed me.
Right.
And he interviewed me for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of them was because I had developed with ShopRite, Grand Union in Atlanta, and some other chains around the country, Sample Fest. And what Sample Fest was running 50 to 60 in-store demos concurrently for 3 days and advertising it. And, the first one that we did was actually in the Lincoln Park ShopRite because they had just opened up the store and we wanted to get a whole bunch of people in. So, and Sample Fest was always a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So That was one of the reasons that Ken had interviewed me. Then what happened is they got Lucky Supermarkets, they got Kmart, they got Coca-Cola, and a couple other clients. And they were a bunch of gerontologists and didn't know anything about food. So Ken reached out to me and said, "Hey, why don't you move to Emeryville, California, from New York, and head up, be our senior vice president and head up our food stuff." So we talked for a bit and did that, and that's why I moved to California. Yeah, I think that, and in fact, in one of the articles that we wrote, which was again back in 1985, this is before Ken and I had gotten together, the graying of America in the food marketplace. So strategies must now be targeted to this important market. Older people must appear in ads more frequently. Older American stereotypes like doddering, feeble, grandmotherly will be replaced by more realistic depictions. Today's older people are more agile, enlightened, and affluent, a trend that will expand in the decades ahead. So, yeah, I mean, we have to, whatever the generation is, we have to be talking about it. In fact, Jason Hart from Aldi and I were just talking the other day about the attraction of Generation Z and millennials to Aldi, and it's because they're very food involved, they're very quality conscious, and they like to save money. So, it's a magic formula for Aldi. And he told me that over the past year, they have 19 million more new customers that have come to Aldi, and the majority of that being Generation Z and millennials.
Well, and that circles back on part of where we started, right? Which is young people, the yuffies, right? They're
Yep,
spending so much money on certain things, they don't have a lot of disposable income. So that hasn't really changed either. But
correct.
and the interesting thing is, and again, the kind of thing retailers have to think about, CPG companies have to think about, and quite frankly, people like you and me have to think about, is that there are certain things that don't change, but there's a lot of change, I think, that takes place around the edges, right? And that it's not the one thing you can't market, even though certain things don't change, you can't market to those groups exactly the same way, right? That there continues to be, you have to pay attention to the nuances. And that's a nuance is a word I think people don't pay enough attention to.
I agree totally with you, because I think that the problem is, and we saw this during the pandemic and after the pandemic, as it relates to in-store technologies. Retailers were throwing stupid money at anything to get their websites up, to self-scanning, just whatever, to build up their databases because they didn't know what to do as a result of the pandemic and the like. And it's not just throwing money at it, but and I think you're using the totally right word. It's the nuances. If you want to capture consumers, it's the nuances, it's the emotion, it's really understanding what's in their heart, in their soul, and in their brain to be able to formulate a strategy that gets them in the store and keeps them coming back to your store.
Well, that is as good a place as any to leave this. Bill, this has been fun. We should do this more often. I really
Anytime.
enjoyed this. And it's fun to share war stories, but also kind of to look forward at the same time.
Absolutely.
That's
Thanks
good.
so much, Kevin. And always great job. Morning News Beat is become, a Bible for so many of us in the industry. So thank you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a really good place to end. And we'll see you soon. Take care.